spent my life working in and around Glasgow, and I started off my career. My passion has always been history ever since I was a child. Really, been fascinated, particularly with the cultures of the Near East, particularly obviously ancient Egypt. My first job from leaving studies was actually in journalism. I was a junior reporter many lives ago for one of the local newspapers here in Glasgow. But that was way back in the very early 80s, and there was a lot of trouble and strife in the UK with the Thatcher government coming in, and lots of businesses were going to the wall back then, particularly in the newspaper industry with new technology, basically taking a lot of jobs away. So basically my view back then was, if you can't beat it, join it. So sure. I did a lot of courses in new technology, IT courses, got my HND, did some computer networking courses, been qualified as a computer network engineer for many years now. And that's basically, after that I joined the local economic development agency here in Glasgow, who basically have offices all over the world. And in that job, I was responsible for all the offices overseas, which was really good, because it sent me to far-flung places like Tokyo and Beijing, Taipei, Seoul, basically all over the world, North America, Europe, to see a lot, particularly the Far East, a lot of the ancient sacred sites in the Far East. So it was a great experience. As I said, my job basically allowed me to do that, which was a great privilege. So that's basically myself in a nutshell. Sure. You asked about Osiris. Well, Osiris was or came to be the most important god in ancient Egyptian religion. Ancient Egyptians had many gods, but Osiris eventually usurped most of the gods in ancient Egypt to become their most important god. He was a god of rebirth and regeneration. And there's a myth written by Plutarch thousands of years ago about Osiris and his wife Isis, who also happened to be his sister. That's how the ancient Egyptians kind of did things. Mm-hmm. Anyway, in Plutarch's myth of Osiris and Isis, Osiris's brother Seth, or Set, was jealous of Osiris, who was essentially the ruler, and he set a trap, a plan to take over, or to take Osiris's crown, Osiris's throne, and he basically set a trap for Osiris, and he created a box, and asked everyone to fit into this box to see who fitted into this box better than anyone else. So Osiris went into the box, and of course, as soon as he's in the box, his brother Seth, with some accomplices, fastened the box with the lid and secured it, and threw the box into the Nile, where basically Osiris essentially drowned. Mm-hmm. His wife went looking for the body, and eventually the body was found in, I think it was an acacia tree, and hearing this, Seth basically found Osiris and cut his body into 16 pieces. Or some parts of the myth say 14 pieces, some say slightly more, but these are the main sort of figures that the myth tells us: 16 pieces, 14 pieces, or thereabouts, and scattered these pieces of Osiris across the land of Egypt. Now, Isis, his wife, went in search of these pieces of Osiris in order to piece the body back together again. Now, she could find all the parts of the body except one part of the body, which was the phallus of Osiris. That essentially is the myth of Osiris. And I got to thinking, well, what does that actually mean? Because obviously a lot of the time you hear that, that there's a lot of truth that can, be embedded within mythological legends that come down to us, and that basically was my thinking. Well, what could this actually be? And I started to read. This was a number of years ago. I started to read the pyramid texts. Now, the pyramid texts are the most ancient religious writings that we have in humankind's history. They're our oldest religious texts, and they're ancient Egyptian texts, obviously. These texts were written in a number of pyramids from the 5th dynasty. That's from about 2200 BC, from round about that time. They're found in about 4 or 5 different pyramids from that period onwards, 5th, 6th dynasty. And the pyramid texts are basically essentially the only writing ever found in these 5th, 6th dynasty pyramids. And they're basically, Egyptologists believe they are like spells to assist the king into the afterlife. Now, one of the things the pyramid texts tell us, or one of the things that, there's different texts and, sort of different pyramids. They're not all the same text in each pyramid.
Sure.
So it's a sort of body of text, if you like, over a number of pyramids. But in one version of these texts, it tells us that, the pyramid itself, this is what it says: the pyramid is Osiris. That's what it says. Just simply, the pyramid is Osiris. The construction of the pyramid, the construction is Osiris. And I thought, well, how could that actually be? How could a pyramid actually be Osiris? So I started reading about obviously I'd read about the myth of Osiris and Isis before, and it just struck me that, well, maybe the first 16 pyramids or the first 16 parts of Osiris from the myth of Osiris actually refers to the first 16 pyramids as being the body of Osiris. Just like the pyramid texts tell us, the pyramid is Osiris, the construction is Osiris. So that's essentially the thrust of the theory, and the missing part of Osiris, which Isis couldn't find, represents not a pyramid as such, but a chamber that's unseen, that's been hidden away, because I take the view that if the pyramid were a recovery system for the country, these first 16 pyramids were built as a recovery system for the kingdom, not a recovery system for the king initially, although that may have developed in much later dynasties. I take the view that the first 16 pyramids were set apart and were built for an entirely different purpose than the pyramids that came afterwards. I think there's about 138 pyramids that have been discovered in Egypt, but I think the first 16 pyramids, that includes the giant pyramids of Giza, of Dashur, of Saqqara and so forth. These pyramids were built for an entirely different purpose, which was, as I said, about the recovery of the kingdom as opposed to the rebirth of the king. It's about the rebirth of the kingdom. That to me was the initial purpose. So this missing part, the first 16, these would be the you know how our own civilization here has built a doomsday vault or a recovery vault, if you like, in one of the islands in the Arctic Circle.
Norway.
Yeah. They built a doomsday or a seed vault there, the Svalbard. I think it's just talking about the missing part of the body of Osiris. It was in the myth that was cut into 16 pieces, supposedly. And basically, I was making the analogy that we have our own modern version of a seed vault on Svalbard Island in the Arctic Circle, which was opened, I think, in 2008. And basically, that's that our seed vault is basically in anticipation of any global disaster that threatens crop diversity, that threatens the food supply. We will have that seed bank to fall back on to reseed, the agriculture in our world. And I'm basically arguing that the ancient Egyptians saw that something was calamity was going to happen to their civilization, and these stories have been handed down to us in the Arab legends, which talk about the ancient Egyptian king Saurid, who saw that the stars in the heavens had changed, had moved away from their normal course. And he asked his priests, what does this mean? And the priests tell him it means in 300 years' time there will be a great deluge followed by a devastating drought. And King Saurid ordered that his civilization, his country, build pyramids to place within them everything that was of value that would assist in the rebuilding of their civilization. So that's one of the myths that has been passed down to us. And, this is basically what I think the ancient Egyptians did. They built these as storehouses or recovery vaults, not just for seeds like what we have in Svalbard, but, for instruments, for tools, for even possibly even for weapons, for all manner of things that would help them basically reboot or kickstart their civilization after the worst effects of the catastrophe had passed. And so it's one thing you would need to make these storehouses really visible. Yeah, strong and powerful, really visible, and from quite a distance away they would need to be really visible. You want these things being found sooner rather than later after any possible catastrophe. So that's what they did. They built them really, really big to make them visible from up to 40, 50 miles away. So they could be seen from quite a distance. They would be recovered and found really, really quickly. Now, that's fine and well for, your standard, essential supplies, seeds and tools and whatnot to replant, to get agriculture kicked off again. That's fine and well for that. But what about, your more precious items, your knowledge, your sacred scrolls, your high wisdom, even your valuable things like gold and other precious artifacts.
Sure.
What do you do with those? You don't put them in with the everyday stuff that you want people to find right away. You don't put that stuff in there, because if people knew that all the precious stuff was in these big structures, then they would get looted. They would get looted before they had any chance to be of any benefit, i.e. as a recovery vault, as a seed vault, people would loot them to get the gold. But if they knew there was no gold in it, it was just seeds, people wouldn't, or more likely, people wouldn't bother about them. It's just seeds. I can nip down the market and get a bag of seeds. That's a lot easier than expending a lot of effort to break into these near impregnable recovery vaults. It just isn't worth the effort for, seeds or some tools. But if there's jewels or, gold or precious items in these, then yeah, it might be worth the effort. So I don't think they put any of the precious stuff in these massively visible structures. And I don't think they placed it under the right paw of the Sphinx either, because again, that's way too visible. That's the first place people would look for things like that. Yeah. Well, until we get, the scans that have supposedly been done, GPR, ground penetrating radar, whatever it's been done, of that area, we'll never really know for sure. But logically, from my perspective, logically, it wouldn't make any sense to put, any sort of valuable goods like, as I said, gold, treasures, whatever, because people, looking for loot, for precious items, would basically end up, going through the place and trashing it just in their ignorance. They could trash, ancient scrolls that, that have got, high wisdom, how to, reboot your civilization, and that could all get destroyed. What you need is a way to plant that, precious material somewhere that can, be pointed to with the structures that you're already building, but that requires someone with, a sort of higher intellect in a sense to work out the where it is, and that's why I think that the pyramids themselves are actually used to point to the final part of Osiris, the part that Isis couldn't find, the hidden part, because that's the part that would really that contains all the information that would need to really regrow their civilization, to reboot their civilization, to reseed their civilization. That's essentially the phallus. That was the seed, if you like, where they could really get the knowledge and the wherewithal to reboot their civilization. So that's kind of very roughly the theory. The 16 pyramids, the first 16 pyramids were built for an entirely different purpose, as a rebirth of the kingdom, not the king. That would be an idea. The rebirth of the king would be an idea, would become a religious idea that would develop out of the original idea of what these structures were for. And the thing is that when you actually look at the evidence, have they ever found a body of any ancient Egyptian king in any of these first 16 pyramids in situ with all his treasures in his sarcophagus? The answer is no, they haven't. They found fragments of bone here and there, small fragments of bone here and there in these first pyramids. But from what we know, and by all accounts, it's been shown that most of this stuff, and not all of it's been shown to be from later intrusive burials. Well, absolutely. I show in the book. I think you've probably seen it if you're been through it. That there's a couple of different sort of unified plans, if you like, going on. There's what they're trying to achieve two things. They're trying to build a recovery system to ensure that their civilization can continue after the worst effects of whatever's coming. But within that recovery system, they've arranged some of those structures in such a way as to create a calendar, a cosmic calendar, if you like, which basically points to when this catastrophe actually happened. And I explain that in the book, and obviously it's fairly controversial, and that the date is like roughly almost 17,000 BC, which basically makes the pyramids 19,000 years old. Now I don't shy away from that. I mean, that's controversial. I know it's controversial, and it will be ridiculed, and I will be lambasted for it. But I absolutely do not shy away from it one little bit, because I've looked at the structures, I've studied the structures to such an extent where I'm absolutely convinced that Orion's belt has definitely been used as the timing mechanism for this cosmic calendar that they present, and it's presented in a entirely different way to that presented by Robert Bauval in his the Orion Mystery book. I think Robert in that book saw some of the parts, but he missed a couple of the parts, and that's explained in this book. But yeah, there's a wider plan. There's a couple of plans going on. The wider plan is the 16 pyramids. If you actually look at the locations and plot those locations onto like a Google map, for example, and just basically plot the locations of the first 16 pyramids that the ancient Egyptians built, what you find is that, I mean, I don't know if this is just entirely coincidence or if there's actually something to this. You know, I'm not insisting that this was a deliberate plan, this particular layout. What you find is that the first 16 pyramids create, if you join them with a line, they create a rough or a crude outline matchstick figure of the standard archetype, Osiris figure. You know, the classic Osiris figure with the three-pronged dative crown and the crook and flail. So it's there. You can see it. You know, if you just join the dots, it is there. Now, I don't know if.
Hello.
Look what TJ Maxx dragged in.
The Devil Wears Prada 2 is now streaming on Disney Plus and Hulu.
We are digital, we are downloadable, we are streamable.
The fashion event of the year is certified fresh.
Pull yourself together, we have work to do.
Critics say it's smart and witty and the perfect sequel.
That's all.
Get runway ready for The Devil Wears Prada 2 on Disney Plus and Hulu. Rated PG-13.
You know, the Osiris figurine became like a map so that people would know where to look, where each of the recovery vaults were in relation to each other. Or if this is something that maybe just developed long afterwards, that, someone realized where they are and, placed the dots on a piece of paper, so to speak, and realized that it created this rough outline of a person. I don't know if this was planned beforehand or if it developed afterwards. We will probably never know that idea. But the fact remains, if you look at the first 16 pyramids and their locations, and you join the dots to create a crude outline of the classic Osiris figure with the attif crown, the three-pronged attif crown, and the crook and flail. But as I said, I don't know if that's just some happy coincidence or if there's actually anything in that. But given that, the ancient Egyptians tell us that the pyramid is Osiris, the construction is Osiris, then maybe there is something to it. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing as well is, that Egyptologists, I mean, their views and things are they're ephemeral. They're constantly changing, and a lot of the times it's kind of difficult to keep up with what the latest view is in a particular aspect of ancient Egyptian study. I definitely take the view of the Egyptians themselves. They tell us themselves that their culture is tens of thousands of years older than what Egyptologists are prepared to consider. I think the texts say that when you include like the gods and the demigods and the followers of Horus and the mortal kings and so forth and so on, their culture dates back to something like 40,000 BC. This is this is the kind of time scale that the ancient Egyptians themselves tell us how old their civilization is. So if I'm saying that, these structures were built by the ancient Egyptians, I'm talking about the very, very ancient Egyptians, not the AEs, but the VAEs, the very ancient Egyptians of 19,000, years ago. This is to do with the hidden part of Osiris, which the myth talks about. One of the very first things that I sort of developed or realised I was curious about was the what are called the concavities in the Great Pyramid and the smaller pyramid at Giza. Now these are sort of lines or concave faces. The Great Pyramid doesn't have 4 perfectly flat or smooth faces. The sides of each face of the Great Pyramid are slightly indented towards the centre, which means you have like a centre line running down the side of each face of the Great Pyramid. And you can see it at certain times of the year. You can see it at the equinox, at the equinoxes, where the sun rising shadows, put certain parts of the pyramid in shadow and certain parts in light. So you can actually see this concave effect on the southern face of the Great Pyramid. It does. Yeah, you can see it there in that photo really, really well. But again, we don't know why they did this. Egyptologists can't tell us what this was for. I mean, it would have been much simpler just to build a smooth face. Why did they indent the sides of each face? Yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling. They are going out of their way to make their work so much more difficult. And when there was, there was no real purpose or reason for doing it, or was there? Was there a reason for doing it? Well, I think there was, and I think it's related to the small pyramid because that has the very same features. They're much less visible because it's a smaller structure, but they've been identified in the smallest pyramid. They're entirely missing from the middle pyramid of Khafra at Giza. Really? But the Great Pyramid and the smallest pyramid, G1 and G3 as they're known to Egyptologists, these exhibit these concavities down each side of the pyramid face. There's no make the construction so much more difficult. And I had to ask myself, why would they do that? There has to be a reason. And then I came up with this idea called the centroid theory, where basically, as I'm undoubtedly sure that you'll know, that a triangle has many centres. A triangle has many, many centres. But in the ancient world, a triangle only had, or there was 3 known centres of a triangle, and these were called the circumcenter, the incenter, and the barycenter. And that basically is the nub of the centroid theory, because you can actually, using the centroid theory and the 3 centres of the pyramids, you can reverse engineer the triangle that plotted those 3 points or those 3 positions where the pyramids are. So that's what I managed to do. I managed to reverse engineer the unique. There's only one triangle that fits it. Yeah. Well, strictly speaking, there's 2, because you can have one point in south and one point in north. But the one that points south is the correct one. And I know this for a number of reasons, which I won't go into today because we would be here for hours and hours. But anyway, there's only one triangle that fits all the criteria, and that's the one that points towards the southwestern desert. Just, outside of the Giza Plateau and on for a couple of kilometres, and it pinpoints this spot in the desert. And I thought, why would it do that? Why would the pyramids at Giza pinpoint this spot using the concavities? Why would it do that? And then I started thinking about the Osiris mystery, the missing part, the body being the 16 parts being the pyramid. Maybe the lost part was, maybe the pyramids were being used to point to this lost part in this part of the desert. So that's what I tried to do in 2008. I went to to Egypt. I went to Giza to try and get to that location.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that might sound a bit bizarre, but, I was fascinated. I wanted to get there. I had to get there. I didn't know what I was going to find if and when I managed to get to that precise spot.
Yeah.
I had no idea. But what I did know, that what I had planned to do was had a small granite pyramid made of Scottish granite.
Nice.
And basically, I had the centroid theory engraved on the underside of this small granite four-sided pyramid of mine. It was very small, could fit in your hand.
Yep.
And I took it with me, and I was going to, like the capstone of a pyramid sits on the top of a massive triangle, if you like. Well, this small granite pyramid of mine was the capstone that would go at the end of this, what I call the centroid triangle, this triangle that pointed to this spot in the desert. And I was going to basically bury my granite capstone at the end of the apex point of the Great Giza Triangle. That's what I call this centroid triangle, the Great Giza Triangle. So that was my plan. So I tried to get to this point, but my goodness, I couldn't get there. There was walls, there was barriers, there's, security towers with, armed guards. There's, I went in through the Giza Plateau, yeah?
Yeah.
Through the tourist entrance, basically.
Sure.
I just basically walked all the way, till I saw Hawasse's wall. And I'm like, and the apex point I wanted of the Great Giza Triangle was just like, it was in touch. It was about 200 meters away on the other side of this fence.
Yeah. And
this fence went for as far as the eye could see. And honestly, I mean, in parts, it was about 13 feet high,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I was like a bit dubious about do I go over this or do I not? And I had a couple of run-ins earlier with a couple of Egyptian guards.
Sure.
They're basically on camel, and they've got the semi-automatic guns and stuff, and you're a bit careful, I don't want these guys to find me. So I kind of looked around. There was nowhere. No one to be seen anywhere. So I'm halfway up this fence, so I'm about 5 or 6 feet up this fence, and then I hear this really horrible sound. And I was like, what on earth was that? I didn't like the sound of it one little bit, so it drops to the ground. I looked round, and there's this camel making this god-awful noise, and there's the guard, the antiquities guard, just kind of looking at me. What are you up to, boyo? So that was me, huckled. So I didn't get very far that day. I didn't get over the fence. But the strange thing is, it's like this fence stops within 200 yards of the very point I wanted to get to. So I managed to get talking to the guard, and it was quite funny because this is the bit where he was asking where I was from and so forth, and I told him I was from Scotland. Oh, Scotland! Oh, you're Egyptian. I was like, what? And then he went into this story about how he was taught in school, apparently as a lot of Egyptian people are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he basically was talking about how ancient Egyptians discovered Ireland and Scotland, and it was a fascinating sort of discussion. And I went back and I looked a bit more into this, and sure enough, there's an Egyptologist, Lorraine Evans, who's written a really excellent book on the subject, which I've read. It's called Kingdom of the Ark, a fascinating book which details the whole history of this Pharaoh's daughter. I think her name was Meritetis, something like that. Although she was also apparently known as Scota.
Queen Scott,
and she was the daughter of the Pharaoh Akhenaten, and who during the Amarna period abolished the whole pantheon of ancient Egyptian gods, and there was to be a monotheism of just one god, and that was Atum.
He was a rebel.
And very much so, because the Egyptian priesthood were outraged by this. They were up in arms by this. So eventually he was kind of run out of town, so to speak, and his family, his daughters, they all had to flee. And the story goes that Scota fled up across Mediterranean into Greece, married a Greek person called Gallius, something like that. They fled across Europe, the southern Europe, or the northern Mediterranean, and countries across into Spain, from Spain up into Ireland, where they had a pitched battle with the ancient Irish tribes at the time. I think that was the Tuatha De Danann, something like that. And then Princess Scota was killed at that battle, but her people apparently were successful in the battle and eventually migrated northwards into an area in the northeast of Ireland. I'm talking about ancient Ireland, when it was like Hibernia, and there was a province known in the northeast as Scotty, or the Scoti, and the tribe that lived there moved over into Dalriada, which was in the west coast of Scotland, which is it's called Argyll today.
Sure.
Dalriada, so it's a fascinating account in Evans's book, and here was me having a blether, having been caught with my hand in the cookie jar with this antiquities garb. You are son of Egypt, and you from Scotland. So, so he basically just gave me a ticking off and says, "Don't do it again," and head back that way, and that was it. So I had some dark thoughts at that moment, James, of an Egyptian jail looming large, and it wasn't a very pleasant thing. Yeah, well, I briefly touch on that in the book. I don't go into it a lot because it is highly sort of controversial, and the evidence apparently for that was kind of done from a video grab, I think, from some documentary, some lab. So I think it was a Swiss lab, something like that, did a screen grab of a computer screen that Dr. Hawass was apparently looking at for something else, and they put the profile from this screen grab through some DNA analyzer and come up with this R1 and NB or whatever it is, haplogroup, which is most prevalent in the western fringes of Europe, mainly Ireland and Scotland, parts of Wales. So I don't know the truth of that. Maybe there is something to it, but it's very
not only that, though,
intriguing. And I think the whole Tutankhamun apparently having this haplogroup, maybe that lends truth to the story that Akhenaten his daughter Scota, because I think Tutankhamun was the son of Akhenaten. So obviously, she would have the same haplogroup as Tutankhamun. So, you could argue, possibly there is something to that particular story. But I think it's one of those things we need more evidence. Well, yeah, I mean, look at what Lorraine Evans, the Egyptologist, says in her book. She talks about ancient Egyptian, what appear for all intents and purposes to be ancient Egyptian boats. They're definitely not Viking boats. They're called the ferriby boats, found in a place in Yorkshire, and they look very much like Egyptian boats, and they're something like 3,500 years old. Wow. So we know as well that Egyptian necklaces, fan speeds have been found, all over, the British Isles. We know that the Scots, the ancient Scots, and I think the ancient Irish as well, mummified their dead. Very few of the northern Western European people to do that. You know, you look at the ancient Egyptian word for the capstone that went in the top of the pyramid was the Bennu, or the Ben stone.
Yeah.
And that's what Scots call the top of their mountains. The peaks of their mountains are bens.
Yeah, that's
You know,
true.
Ben
That's right.
Nevis, Ben Lomond.
Same
you know,
as in Ireland.
these could very well be ancient connections back to the roots of the Scots and the Irish. And in the book, the Secret Chamber of Osiris, I've got some material from Muhammad al-Fayyad, who talks about himself being taught as a boy about the roots of, the Scots and the Irish coming from ancient Egypt. And he's actually at the moment designing a monument for Princess Scota for he's got a Highland estate here in Scotland.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, called Balnagowan, and he's basically designing a statue of Princess Scota to go in his estate, because he firmly believes that she is the roots of the Scottish and partially the Irish people. Yeah. Young had the Rosetta Stone, whereas Sempolion only had copies of parts of it, so, yeah. And then, there's Graham Hancock, another Scotsman from Edinburgh. His books have totally, changed the narrative, or have totally changed the discussion since the early 1990s about our ancient origins of who we really are, where we really came from. Graham's books have fascinated millions of people all across the world. He's got a new book coming out this year, Magicians of the Gods, which I think is an update to Fingerprints of the Gods. So I think that's one that everybody should, interested in this particular genre, should be looking out for. Well, it's really, really hard to pinpoint that one. The ancient Egyptians, they tell us that the heavens, the stars, when I say the ancient Egyptians, I'm talking about their stories that were preserved by, in the Arab legends, of 1400 years ago. But, to be fair to the Arabs, preserving the ancient Egyptian stories, a lot of people, poo-poo, oh, it's an Arab legend, they talk about, magical bending glass and all sorts of other strange things that were found in the pyramid. Yeah, stories become embellished, but I think there's a central truth in a lot of these stories that the Arabs preserved. Now remember, the Arabs preserved for us, for Western society, the works of Plato, the works of Socrates, these great philosophers. These were preserved by the Arabs, and then they came back. Throughout the Arabs preserved these works, when Europe was in the Dark Ages, and then the Arabs brought them back to Europe, and through the Renaissance, so it's the deeds and the acts and the good work of the Arab peoples that preserved all this stuff, that would have otherwise been lost, so for people to have a go that, these are just Arab legends. Well, they preserved the works of Plato and Socrates, and other philosophers, so look at the broader picture here, they could just as well as have preserved the ancient writings of the writings of the ancient Egyptians, so I believe they did, so when the Arab legends talk about the ancient Egyptian king Saurid talking about building these structures, to preserve everything that the country would need to reboot itself after the deluge had passed. Then, well, maybe there's truth in that. Maybe there is truth that they saw the stars move out of their normal course. Because here's the thing. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of a guy called George Dodwell. He's an Australian astronomer, and he's passed away now, but he did some incredible research, I think back in the 50s, and he basically looked at all the ancient structures and the alignments of these structures, and they plotted them on a graph. And these basically structures were aligned in, to the cardinal directions and so forth. And what Dodwell discovered was that around the year 2300 or 2350 BC, the Earth's the axis of the Earth, or the obliquity of the Earth, was at 26 or just over 26 degrees.
Sure.
Now the thing is, our current model, are based on the sort of Newcomb model of the Earth's rotational axis, or its swing, its obliquity ranges from between roughly 22 and 24 degrees. Yeah. Now Dodwell has shown mathematically that actually in 2350 BC the Earth's axis was 26 degrees. How do we explain that? How does modern science explain that? So something happens to the Earth's axial tilt. Something happens to it, inclination. And on the other side, there are 33 degrees and 39 degrees. So again, you've got a 6-degree difference. Now, what that to me is actually showing is that the sky moved 6 degrees. The stars moved 6 degrees in a circular fashion. Yeah? And the thing is, but wait a minute, if the pole at Greenland, the pole was in the centre of Greenland, that's roughly about 17, 18 degrees away from where the pole is today. So why is Giza only saying 6 degree shift if we're actually saying the pole was in the centre of Greenland, which is roughly 17, 18 degree shift? Sure. Well, actually, if you take Google Maps and you plot the point from Giza to the centre of Greenland, and you map that in degrees, you'll find it comes to 54 degrees. If you map Giza from Giza to the pole just now, it comes to 60 degrees, obviously, because Giza's at 30 degrees latitude, So 60 degrees is, to the pole today, it's 54 degrees from Giza to the centre of Greenland pole, That's a difference of 6 degrees. Well, that's, that's the first thing you see when you arrive at Giza or at any pyramid. What do you see? Triangles everywhere. You see triangles everywhere. They're speaking in the language of triangles. There's, and as I said, this the centroid theory. The position of the 3 pyramids at Giza creates a unique triangle which points to this specific spot in the desert. And you know what? I tried to get to that spot. I tried going direct from the north through Giza and then up around, going all the way around down to the south and then in from the south upwards, and it was blocked off as well. I couldn't get into that spot, either from the north straight down or from the south straight up. I couldn't get in. Now I've stood between the paws of the Sphinx. That's one of the most sacred places in all Egypt, and they really don't allow very many people to go in there. It's all cordoned off. So, but I managed to get in, and but I couldn't get into this piece of worthless desert, supposedly worthless desert. So it makes me wonder, well, is there something to that spot? And here's the thing, here's the kicker. After, I couldn't get into the spot, I couldn't place my little apex, my little capstone at that apex point of the Great Giza Triangle, that spot in the desert. I couldn't get there. And I was disappointed because I wanted to recite a few words from the hymn to Osiris, just in homage, I suppose, to what the ancient Egyptians had left, what they'd done and what they'd done for all of humanity, really. So I couldn't do that. I got back to Scotland and I emailed Hawass, I sent Hawass a couple of emails telling them about this and what I'd been doing, and asking him why he built this wall. It's called Hawassi's Wall, and he replied back. It was a standard reply: to protect the guests of Egypt. That was the standard reply. But a few months afterwards, I looked on Google Maps, and what were they doing? What was happening at that apex spot? It was being dug up. It was being dug up. You want to see it now. There was bulldozers, there was, dumper trucks, all over the place, all over that site. And, right in the heart of it is the apex point, and it's all been dug up. It looks as if it's been covered over with part of it. I don't know what they've done, but it looks like it's been covered over with concrete or something, but there's nothing there. I just don't know why they did it, or if there's anything to it. But this happened months after I wrote to Hawass about it, about the theory of the centroid theory, about the apex point, and that's what happened a few months afterwards. You can go on and look at it. Google Earth has this time lapse, which you can go back a few years. Go back to about February or January 2009. I was there in March 2008. I wrote to Hawass about December 2008, and then I think in February 2009 they were starting to dig it up. Nobody could really do anything in Egypt unless the proper credentials. To be fair, you can understand why that would be. But there's another aspect of Hawass which I won't dwell on here. But I think he could have helped things along a little bit easier, and been a little bit more open in certain circumstances with certain things. Well, obviously, if you go to the website, there'll be links there. The website's www.scottcreighton.co.uk. The book is available in all good bookstores, Waterstones, Barnes and Noble, and also available online from the publisher Inner Traditions Bearing Company. It's also available on Amazon and Goodreads and other good online bookstores. Well, it could go either way. It could actually become even worse, or it could become more open. I know of some Egyptologists. I'm not going to name any names. Friends of mine who are Egyptologists. I can't name their names because they've got livelihoods, and if I named names, their livelihoods would be put in jeopardy, because they've got research grants that they need to get, and if they don't toe the line, it's frowned upon. It really is frowned upon, and they tell me this themselves. This is these Egyptologists telling me this themselves, and these Egyptologists even tell me things like, the cartouche in the Great Pyramid in Campbell's Chamber, it's a fake. We know it's a fake. Yeah, totally part of the line, it's one of these things we know about but we can't talk about, but everybody inside, or the more sort of forward-thinking Egyptologists know this. So I know, James, what I'm getting at here is I know there are now forward-thinking Egyptologists out there who think there is a different paradigm to explore. And you see, there's two paradigms that have been presented to us in history. That's the paradigm of catastrophe, that's why the pyramids were built, or tombs, that's why the pyramids were built. These are the two paradigms. Now, what I've done with this book is taken the other paradigm, that they were built, as a mechanism, to avert, a catastrophe. That's why they were built. But I'm also saying that latterly they would have most likely become tombs for kings, because these things would have become sanctified. They would become religious icons, these great pyramids. They would have become the means, to the rebirth. Yeah, because that's what they did for the earth. So eventually they would, these pyramids, this idea would be, become, the means for the king to be reborn. So it was, it was both. This is what I'm saying. These legends that have come down to us that say, yeah, well, they were built for as a recovery system for the flood. They were built as tombs. I'm saying, actually, they're both right.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm saying. And what I'm hoping is that the more open-minded younger Egyptologists that are around today are maybe more accepting to looking into that possibility, that there might just be more to these Arab legends than we're currently giving them.
Sure.
Yeah, I hope that the newer, younger Egyptologists have more open minds. I don't think this will happen in my lifetime, but who knows? But at the end of the day, the evidence is mounting. Evidence is mounting that these were not tombs. These first 16 pyramids were not tombs for kings. They were not rebirth chambers. The very first pyramid at Saqqara, what did they find in it? They didn't find a body. They found tons and tons of grain.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they found in it. They found tens of thousands of storage vessels. Yeah. That's what they found in it. Didn't find a body. Look at the Great Pyramid. What did they find? What did Colonel Howard Vyse find in the relieving chambers above the Great Pyramid when he was opening these chambers in 1837? What was his very first comment? One of his very first comments about what he found in these chambers. Black soot.
Yeah.
Black soot. In every single one of these chambers, all the way up. 4 chambers he opened, and this black soot was in all of these chambers. What could that black soot be? Well, they haven't really identified it definitively. They think it might be, decayed rock or, insect exuviae or something, but it's so smoothly spread across the floor of all these chambers. It can't be that. It just can't be that. Now, I think I know what it is, and I explain it in the book. It's to do with read Petrie's study of the Great Pyramid, and particularly the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. All the walls have been the granite walls in this chamber have been slightly blown outwards.
Blackened.
There's cracks in the ceiling. There's scorch marks. There's burned scorch marks in this chamber. Now, that sounds to me like there was an explosion of some kind in that pyramid. But what? Now, we're not talking nuclear, we're not talking some, exotic science here. It could be something as simple as a grain dust explosion. If there's a massive amount of grain being handled, and say, for example, the massive grand gallery below the King's Chamber, there's this build-up of grain dust, yeah? And somebody happens to walk by or strikes a copper chisel, and there's a spark, boom. Honestly, that's the biggest bomb you can have. A grain dust explosion. They're lethal, absolutely lethal. They can throw, 2-ton, blocks, hundreds of yards. Incredible powerful. And the dust from a grain dust explosion, what does it look like after it settles? Black dust. There you have it. That's what they found in all these chambers above. So to me, there was an explosion in that chamber, but to me it was to do with grain and that's what that black dust is. Oh, there's all sorts of explanations for the bent pyramid. I definitely it's one of these things which tells you that the pyramids were a plan. It's one of these things that tells you that
exactly.
it wasn't a mistake, because if it was a mistake, you would strip it down at the point of failure, wouldn't you? With casing stones all the way to the top. You wouldn't do it. No, what you would do is you would strip it down. You would use it as a quarry to build one and get it right. But no, they didn't do that. They kept on building it. They kept on building, the casing stones all the way to the top, and they built, some ancillary buildings as well. No, that was a mistake. You want to build You want to build a perfect true pyramid, which is the Egyptologists' theory.
Sure.
Well, you would strip that down as a quarry, and you would reuse the stone from that. You wouldn't, re-quarry, at great expense, a lot more stone to build the red pyramid as a true pyramid. You would use that one there. That was your mistake. The Egyptologists say, but he needed a pyramid. In case he died. You needed one that was already built. Well, he already had one that was already built. The Meidum pyramid. That was already built. Yeah, yeah. It's the encasing thing that it's truly, truly bizarre. But one of the other things I think is going on is there's a whole manner of different layers going on here. Different people from different epochs coming along and muddying the water, adding their own little bit. Look at the Pyramid of Meidum. That's the...
I'm not giving up. I am selling the building.
The final season of FX's The Bear.
The restaurant is flooded.
Everything's either going to be okay.
No, stop.
Or not.
We are outgunned and we are outmanned, but we have each other.
FX's The Bear, the final season. All episodes now streaming on Disney+.
Just near the Fayum in Egypt, quite far south of Dashur. Now, that was apparently the first pyramid that Snefru, who was Khufu's father, that's the first one that he apparently built. Now, apparently it collapsed, or according to Egyptologists, it apparently collapsed shortly after its completion. But the bizarre thing of that pyramid is that it was obviously built by two different people. The first people understood good engineering practice, and the people that came along afterwards didn't. Because the people that built the core step pyramid of Meidum, as you can see it in all the photographs. Now, the step pyramid of Meidum is actually got casing stones. It's not just core blocks. The step pyramid of Meidum is actually it's got casing stones, so it was finished. But then Snefru came along and he wanted to turn it into a true pyramid. So what does he do? He builds the casing, he builds more casing on top of the casing to try and make a true pyramid, which collapsed. Why did it collapse? Because he built it in sand. Yeah. Now, any good engineer knows you don't build something on sand. But the engineers that built the core of the Meidum pyramid with its casings, its stepped casing stone, they built it in solid rock, bedrock, but Snefru didn't. So that to me, there's a clue, there's a little hint that there's some people out there that knew what they were doing, and there's another bunch of people came along at some later date, were doing stuff and they just hadn't a clue what they were doing. Yeah, and they did this all with rock pounders and copper chisels. It simply beggars belief, but that's the theory, that's what we're left with, to accept in the Egyptologists' paradigm. And that's why I say, I just don't think they want to look at it too closely. They don't want to believe. That's a currently accepted paradigm. It was a mistake, and so he finished it off in case he died early. But he went on and built, the Red Pyramid, which was the first true pyramid. Well, I don't accept that argument at all, because he already had a pyramid built at Meidum if he died early, so he could have stripped that pyramid down, knowing, that he already had a burial place ready, stripped it down, re-quarried it and built. But no, he finished it, he put the casing stone all the way to the top. That's not something gone wrong. There's some other reason for that bend. I've read some theories. I don't have a particular theory on that myself, but it really is a real enigma, that one.